Okay. Hi, Matt McIver. I'm here with Peggy Huppert from NAMI Iowa. Peggy, how are you?
Good, great.
Good, good. So you've been with NAMI for about how long now?
4.5 years.
4.5 years in the executive director role.
I am,
Yeah.
right.
Tell us a little bit about what NAMI Iowa does, what you focus on, what's important to you.
Well, NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're part of as the name implies, a national organization. We're the largest and oldest grassroots group addressing mental health issues in the country. We have chapters in all 50 states and over 600 local affiliates. Here in Iowa, I direct the state chapter, and we have 15 local affiliates.
And so National Alliance on Mental Illness, and in what way do you sort of engage with issues of mental illness and with the public or with legislators, or with what is it that you guys are focused on?
Well, we focus on education, advocacy, and support.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't offer clinical services. We offer classes and support groups and presentations by people with lived experience. So those are people with a mental health diagnosis and also loved ones of people with a diagnosis. And I'm personally, I'm a family member. I have 2 adult daughters who have mental health conditions and my spouse. So NAMI programs are all evidence-based. They're all thoroughly vetted and researched, and we do training of our volunteers, on average 2 days of training to help them be very well versed in how to present the programs. And probably our best known programs are family to family and peer to peer, and those are 8-week classes where you learn more about the illness and how to live in wellness and recovery if you're a person with a diagnosis, or how to support your loved one for the family member. And then we have support groups, as I said. We also have presentations. One is called In Our Own Voice, where people are trained to tell their story. We have a program called Ending the Silence, which is designed for middle and high school kids, where we talk about the signs and symptoms of mental illness. And if you or someone you know is experiencing these, what can you do? Where do you go? How do you get help? And then we have a program called Provider, which is actually for clinicians to help them be better providers of mental health care.
Oh, cool.
And we have collaborated with Des Moines University, and they now are requiring this NAMI Provider class, which is a 15-hour class of all their third-year medical students.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So our goal is to, we're never going to have enough psychiatrists. We need to make family docs and emergency room docs and nurses and social workers and PAs better at delivering mental health care. So that's what we're trying to do with that. All our services except Provider are free. And
that's amazing.
So, yeah. And so what we're about is offering help and hope in a non-clinical setting.
What do you find as you talk to your national organization and other chapters around the country? I'm sure there are needs common to every NAMI chapter across the country. Are there particular needs or particularly areas of focus in Iowa that you found?
Well, Iowa is really still a rural state.
Mm-hmm.
So we have particular challenges with having enough providers mm-hmm. and having access to the providers. We only have fewer than 200 psychiatrists in the whole state, and only about 50 child psychiatrists. And that's what you would normally find in one metropolitan area. And that's what we have for the entire state. So it's not uncommon to have a 3 to 4 month wait to get in to see a psychiatrist.
3 to 4 months.
Yes.
So a third to a quarter to a third of a year.
Right. So obviously that doesn't work too well if you're in crisis. not good. We also don't have enough of almost any kind of service. We're notoriously at the bottom of all states for inpatient beds, but not everyone needs to go to an inpatient, psychiatric facility.
Sure.
If we had more and better community-based services, those could fill in the gap, but we unfortunately don't have that either. We have a real gap in crisis services specifically, and especially for youth. We have no crisis services specifically for kids like ages 10 to 17. We have very few, even if someone were to, we have mobile crisis, but then unfortunately, if they need to get out of their home or out of the setting where they are, there's very few options about where they can go. Really, in Iowa, in a lot of places, you're limited to jail or the emergency room. And those
From
are
an
not good
evidence-based
options.
standpoint, have those proven to be good options for folks who are dealing with mental
Well,
health?
yeah, definitely not jail.
Yeah.
And law enforcement agrees with us. I mean, they don't want to have people with serious mental illness in their jails.
That shouldn't be their function.
No, but unfortunately, they've become the mental health providers of last resort. So we work a lot with law enforcement to try to do education with them, but also most hospital emergency rooms can't handle people in crisis. Most small hospitals don't have inpatient psychiatric units, or if they do, they're very small and they're not usually adequately staffed. So there's really only about 8 facilities in the whole state that have robust inpatient programs. So we know that there are other things that could work well too, but we just unfortunately we're not doing them consistently or in enough places to make a difference.
So it sounds like, obviously mental health in this country has got its challenges in the best of years. And it sounds like Iowa has some unique challenges in the best of years. I don't think I'll get a lot of pushback from folks on the idea that 2020 has not been the best of years. What are you seeing as the stresses of this particular unique year? At least, we hope it's unique. We hope we don't have a lot of these kind of years. The stresses that has put on folks who are dealing with issues of mental illness, or has it brought forward more folks who are dealing with those issues, in part given everything that's going on in the world? And we could run down the list.
Well, we historically said that 1 in 5 people in the United States, and that includes Iowa, obviously, will experience a mental health condition in any given year. So 1 in 5, that's about 600,000 Iowans. About 137,000 Iowans live with chronic and serious mental illness, meaning it interferes with their ability to work, to live their lives. And that's a lot of people. But what we found now with the pandemic is that it's more like 1 in 4. That's how much, schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder, those have not increased. Those tend to hold pretty steady at their rates of 1 to 3% of the population. But what has increased dramatically are incidences of generalized anxiety disorder and major depression.
Right.
So there's definitely a fallout from that. And the group of people who seem to be doing the worst are young people.
Really?
People between the ages of 18 and 25. There was a study that came out in August nationwide that found that 1 in 4 people in that age group reported seriously considering suicide.
25%.
Yes.
Wow.
The other group that we're seeing being seriously affected are young children, because you might not think that they are getting all of this, but you know how young children learn and grow and develop? is by being around other kids their age and by socializing. When they're isolated, and they're in situations of stress and tension and anxiety, and they're going to pick up on that. And they've been separated from their friends, from their activities, and I think we're going to be seeing the effects of that, unfortunately, for years to come. And then in Iowa, we have farmers, and it's been a terrible year for most of us, but it's really been a terrible year for them because not only did they have the pandemic, but they had the derecho and drought. So they've had their crops destroyed. They have, their failure to thrive. They've had the trade wars going on,
which is big, particularly for the pork and soybean, which are huge categories for Iowa. That's been brutal on the commodity prices of those and on the available markets for those.
So, and then of course it's not just the farmers, but it's all the people who depend on farming for a living. The feed people and the implement people and so it has ripple effects way beyond there. And so one of the things we've been working on is with ISU Extension and some other farm groups is the idea of farmer peer support and how to get more help out, because it's a unique dynamic. A lot of farmers are loath to admit that they need help. And are there, but the social isolation makes it worse. Lack of providers, and suicide rates are climbing pretty dramatically for farmers and ranchers because of all that, and because of the availability and prevalence of guns, because that's the primary way that men complete suicide.
And that's statistically that's been shown to be a more lethal option than some other options that folks may take. So if they've got ready access to a firearm, it's more likely that, as you'll say, they'll complete that act.
85% effective. So it's pretty effective way to take your own life. And where women tend to use other pills or slit wrists or other mechanisms,
which are typically less effective.
Guns are highly lethal. So yes, so that's part of the dynamic as well. Another thing that we're seeing is among young people, suicide rates are always highest among men as a gender. But the two groups where they're rising is over 55 and under 25. And the CDC came out with a study several years ago that showed that a lot of young men who belong to cultural or ethnic racial minorities took their own lives. Their family expressed great surprise, saying, "We had no idea. We had no idea." He never said anything. He never asked for help. He never, showed any signs. And that speaks to the stigma that still exists, that especially young men from certain cultural, ethnic, racial minorities still feel the weight of this and the stigma, and also farmers, frankly, that they don't ask for help. They don't reach out for help. They just take it until they can't.
These are very proud folks, often very proud cultures and communities. And I think rural Iowa, I would describe as a culture, has its own particular cultural attributes. And I think pride is very, very strongly one of them, and rightly so, but it can have some negative knock-on consequences, as you're talking about. Now, folks may be wondering why the artistic director of a theater company is having this kind of conversation with the executive director of a mental health nonprofit. But you and I had a great conversation recently about our upcoming production of It's a Wonderful Life on Iowa PBS, which is, of course, a heartwarming holiday show. And it's often easy to forget that it is, in fact, the story of a suicide attempt.
Right.
And that similar to what you're just describing, I mean, it's a man here in the middle of his life, George Bailey, who hits a personal crisis where it looks like the family business that he inherited from his father is going to collapse, that financially he will be ruined. He could even face jail for alleged improprieties. Everything comes crashing down around him, and he feels like the world would be better without him in it. And much as you just described about these cultures of pride and self-reliance, he talks to no one about it. He self-medicates by going to a bar, and ends up on a bridge contemplating taking his own life. Which I've just made the worst commercial ever for It's a Wonderful Life. But it makes it relevant to not only 2020, but Peggy, tell us a little bit about, do these sorts of trends get better during the holidays, or is that an additional stress for folks?
Well, unfortunately, they don't usually get better through the holidays. They often get worse. And I think, this is going to be a particularly challenging holiday season because, we talk about the stress of getting together with family who, we don't always see a lot and we don't always agree with things. And there's a stress there. But I think the stress of knowing you can't see them is more poignant. It can be tougher. And as I said, social isolation is the enemy of good mental health. So NAMI is very much built on the idea of connection. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of our support groups is called Connection. And I said, the pandemic's been very hard on NAMI because we have what I call the church basement programs where, a lot of them actually are conducted in church basements. Mm-hmm. But, it's all about connection and getting together with people who understand what you're going through. And we're big huggers. We love to hug. And, that's all really been taken away from us. We've had to figure out how to do everything virtually. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, these holidays, it looks like it's going to be, to a large extent, to stay safe, virtual this year. Yeah. And that's going to be hard on people. It is. And there's also, still George Bailey, that film was made a long time ago, mm-hmm. but a lot of it still rings true, which is why it has remained so popular. Sure. Because the themes are universal and timeless. And unfortunately, we still have, George Bailey was suffering from anxiety and depression. I mean, it wasn't labeled that way, but he was.
It's pretty obvious in the movie, I would say. And pretty obvious in the theater adaptation as well.
The brilliance of the show is that, they find a way to show him what difference he made in his life and how things would have been so different if he had not lived. That's right. What gets people, right? So we're like, oh, it's just a wonderful lesson and it's so heartwarming and it has such a great, ending. I think a lot of people forget about the beginning and how really dark it is. Yes. At the beginning, because it ends up so wonderful and loving and wonderful, but that's the reality for a lot of people. People who are contemplating suicide believe that the world would be better off without them. And they don't usually have an angel come to visit them and show them how life, all the impacts that they've made in their lives and why, if the world is better with them there. So, they don't get to have the experience that George Bailey gets.
Right.
And there's still often a pride, of fear of reaching out for help, of asking for help. And so that sense of desperation and of truly believing the world would be better off without them is what leads to suicide completion.
If someone finds themselves in that moment, if we have the situation where someone watching this right now finds themselves on that metaphorical bridge, obviously we can't all have our Clarence the Angel tap us on the shoulder, but what what can folks do? What resources are out there for folks who may be experiencing those kinds of thoughts and that kind of stress in this holiday season?
Well, what I say to people first is try to head it off. That's why we really talk a lot about trying to stay mentally, psychologically healthy with things like making, if it's not in person via Zoom or just picking up the phone and talking and connecting with people, watch out, look out for people in your life who you haven't heard from in a while, or you think are isolated and might need someone to reach out. It's amazing how much of a difference that can make. Just knowing that someone cares and someone's thinking about them. There are crisis lines available, National Suicide Prevention. There's Your Life Iowa, which is a great resource. You can call or text or email them. There's 211, which is also a great resource to get help.
What is 211? Just so folks know.
211 is a number you just dial, and it's Central Iowa, and you can, any kind of help that you need, whether it's transportation, housing, emergency support, mental health, physical health, and they'll help you right then and refer you on to get the resources that you need. And then there's also NAMI. Reach out to us. We have a warm line, meaning it's not a crisis line, but it's answered Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 4:30. And we listen and we try to direct people to the help and resources that they need to move on with their lives and get better. But what is not helpful is if someone close to you is suffering and you hear a cry for help, to say, well, it'll get better, or snap out of it, or a lot of people have it worse than you do, or any of those kinds of phrases are not helpful.
So you talked a lot about a connection here. In that moment of crisis, it sounds like if you get some sort of cry for help or recognition of something like that, it's about connecting that person to the right resources that's going to help them get the help that they need.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And
there's lots of ways to do that.
Yes, and those are important, and we'll certainly try to have links to those in the description for sure. What you talked briefly at the beginning of that great last answer about what folks can do to improve their mental health so that they don't arrive at those crisis points. You talked about, you mentioned connection, Zoom calls like this. We're in the middle of a national social experiment on the impact of social isolation on huge populations of folks. In the middle of all of this, tell us more about what sort of steps folks can take to be able to stay out of that crisis zone or make things better for themselves.
Well, I always think about what would I have advised George Bailey to do? Right?
That's a better question.
And I would have, first of all, I would have advised him to talk to his wife. And,
she's so great. I've never understood that.
Great. Yeah.
Mary's the best. She's my favorite in that whole show. Why doesn't he just talk to Mary?
Right. Now, I think part of that is the times that, he was a man and he felt the weight of all this on him. It was his responsibility. But yeah, he should have been talking to Mary.
Do you think there would have been for him, talking about those cultural components too, a sense of embarrassment or shame about being in the predicament in the first place?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that still exists, by the way. It's gotten better, but it still exists. There's no doubt about it. But then what else do you see in the film? You see or the show that all these people rally around him, right? And that's what's so heartwarming. But so what that tells us is that he could have
And they do it because Mary finds out, by the way.
Yes, that's right. But if he had gone to them in advance, he could have access that before getting to the point of desperation. I know that sometimes it seems like things are just advancing so fast that you feel just, up against it, and you really just don't know what to do. So suicide also often is a very impulsive. So that's why we know that if somebody who has a suicidal ideation does not have the means to complete it, they won't. So it's if that's another thing you can do, is to look out for loved ones if they are really struggling, to make sure that there is not a gun available to them, or any other thing that they could use to complete that, because it is often impulsive and will often subside if people reach out to them and show them, like George Bailey and Clarence and his loved ones, that no, actually, we need you because you've done all this good, and look, we're all going to rally around you and help you get through this.
Right.
So they see then the hope. But during this pandemic, what I advise people is to find something every day that you can do that brings you joy, that makes you brings you happiness and joy. I like the word joy, but also can help you feel productive, like you're accomplishing something, you're making a difference, because that is so crucial for people to feel like they're worthwhile. They're contributing and they're making a difference. And then I also say, find something farther into the future that you can look forward to, that you can plan for. And, whether it's a trip or a graduation or an anniversary or something that you can have out there to be looking forward to, those help a lot. And then, of course, the usuals of try to get outside, to get some exercise, to move your body, to eat as healthfully as possible. Don't drink too much alcohol, get enough sleep, because all those things are also, they all play into having healthy mental health outlook. I
think that's wonderful. And to make that connection with people that you were talking about, if George had just asked, if George had just talked to Mary, I mean, it would be a much shorter and probably less impactful film. But so dramatically, I get why he didn't. But but it also, as you're describing, maps onto very real behavior that we're still seeing 60 years later. Right.
Absolutely.
Well, this is wonderful and great help to folks. And as folks are moving forward, where can they find out more about you and NAMI Iowa and your work?
Well, go to our website, namiiowa.org. Our national website, which is nami.org, is wonderful too, just for, resources to learn more about mental health conditions, and what are the signs and symptoms, and what are the treatments. And, what I'd like to say is that mental illness, there is no cure for it, but there are lots of really effective treatments. So we compare it more to a chronic illness like diabetes, where there's no cure, but there are very effective treatments where if you adhere to those, you can live a long and healthy life. And the same is true with mental. So we don't want people to feel ever hopeless, or if they get this diagnosis, that's like the end of any hope for. I think that's a fear of a lot of people is, they don't want to reach out for help because they don't want to get the diagnosis, because that signals to them, for the same reason that people who feel a lump don't go to the doctor because they're afraid of a cancer diagnosis, for example. But just like cancer, which is no longer a fatal illness, it's become more of a chronic illness. with so many effective treatments. The same is true with mental illness, and ignoring it will not make it better. It will make it worse. And it's absolutely imperative to reach out for help. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go see a psychiatrist, or you have to go to therapy, or you have to, there's a whole range of solutions and help available.
And that diagnosis that folks may be worried is the end of something could well be the beginning of getting help and the beginning of hope for turning things around.
Absolutely. Steve Carlin, who's a local news anchor, has spoken at our walk event several times about his own experience. He was diagnosed with major depression and generalized anxiety disorder. And he said, when I look back at all the things I put my family through and my coworkers through because I was suffering, but I refused to admit it and I refused to seek help, it makes me ashamed. He said, my life is so much better since I reached out for help. And I'm now on medication. I have a therapist. I have a routine. And he said, I can't tell you, it's like night and day. So that's just one example of how a life can change for the better.
And that it takes that first step of reaching out for help, whether it's to a friend or a family member or to NAMI or to a hotline. That first step of reaching out can be the step towards healing, towards a healthy life. Again, not saying things are cured, but you're describing situations that can be managed in a way that allows folks to have happy, healthy, productive lives, even as they deal with what their circumstances may be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And things can change, right? So that's the challenge of mental health, but not unlike a physical condition, right? Medicines don't work forever. Treatments don't work forever. Sometimes you have to change it up and you need to try something different. But having that whole support network and also knowledge, very powerful, right? You really can't start addressing something unless you understand it. So that's also a primary thing that we do is to try to help people understand the illness so they can move forward and effectively address it.
Well, Peggy, thank you. You guys are doing wonderful things in Iowa for folks and families dealing with mental health issues. We appreciate that. We appreciate your time to help diagnose George a little bit and see where hopefully we now moving forward can make some better choices than George did in that crisis moment.
Hashtag talk to Mary.
Talk to Mary. Hashtag talk to Mary. We're putting that on social media, George. No judgments. Everybody has their own path, but we can make a better choice. So thank you so much for everything that you guys are doing and for your time today. I think this is great information. We really appreciate it.
You bet. It was my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for bringing attention to this in conjunction with the show. Because he said, people might think, well, that was in the past. It's not that way anymore. Not true. So thank you.
And particularly not true this year.
Right.
We're dealing with more of this probably this year than we have in a while. So
that's right.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Folks, be sure to tune into Iowa PBS on December 19th for It's a Wonderful Life.
I will be.
There you go. Get your watch party together over Zoom.
Yeah.
Set up the group chat now. All right. Thanks, Peggy.
You bet. Thank you.